My name is Stephen Frosh. I'm Professor of Psychology in the Department of Psychosocial Studies at Birkbeck, University of London. Welcome to my exp. Trauma has become a really central notion in contemporary society. Some people have even said that we're living in a trauma culture today, by which they mean that it seems like to get credibility for any statement you make, you have to link it in some way with a traumatic background. I think that's an overstatement myself, but nevertheless it is clear that people are speaking about trauma in a way and to a degree that they never did until about at least the 1980s and perhaps more recently still. I think we should notice a couple of things about this if we can. One is that trauma is a historical notion. It doesn't really start to be used as a concept until the middle of the 19th century. And initially, it was related to the enormous shift in people's perceptions that came with the railways, with the change in speed, with the ways in which time had to be regulated across different places, with new ideas about space, with what other people have called the shock of the new. Now, trauma was controversial, has always been controversial right through its historical development. From that, early beginnings with the railways. In the First World War, for example, people will be very familiar with the idea of shell shock, of soldiers being sent back from the trenches in complete neurotic meltdown. And the question there were these soldiers malingering, so they didn't have to fight anymore? Should they be punished as deserters? Should they be forced back into the fighting as a way of getting over this shell shock, this trauma? Was there something physical at root? The idea of shell shock was that some real physical damage might have been done by being close to an exploding shell. But if you call shell shock war neurosis instead, then you start to think, is it physical? Is it psychological? How seriously can we take this? And this debate went on right through the Second World War as well, right through until the 1960s and the complexities of dealing with Vietnam veterans who were heroes in America and yet also suffered deeply from various kinds of war neurosis and so couldn't be written off as malingerers. It was actually only in the wake of that, the Vietnam situation and of course the Holocaust, the effects of the traumatic experiences of the concentration camps, of the genocide of the Holocaust, on survivors and indeed even on their children. It's only in the light of all that people started to really believe that trauma was something utterly central and significant to the experiences that we might have, should be taken seriously in its own right, could not be reduced to some kind of pretense. And indeed, it's very striking that the notion that people are mostly very familiar with now of post-traumatic stress disorder only entered the psychiatric lexicon formally in 1980. It's really a very recent development. A trauma is an event that's so overwhelming that we cannot metabolize it, cannot digest it. We cannot make it part of our psychic apparatus. We can't put it in its place. And included in that is a notion that because it can't be dealt with, it can't be thought about, it means it can't be symbolized, which includes being put into words. So people often can't speak about their traumatic experiences. They can't say anything. They struggle to find ways to articulate the damage that's been done to them. And this happens in therapy, so hard to speak about the worst events of our lives. And it happens in a general culture as well. The paradigm case for this was supposedly the case of Holocaust survivors, who, it was held for many years after the war, could not speak about their experiences, not just because they wanted to get on with their lives and they didn't want to think about them again, but also because once they started talking, they felt like their psyches would explode. They wouldn't be able to survive psychologically. And that story about the silence around Holocaust experiences, but also other traumatic experiences, for example, child sexual abuse, that story of the silence that is imposed on trauma survivors by the nature of the trauma itself, is still around. I think still people believe that. My view is that there's a lot of evidence that this is at best an overstatement and at worst a way of avoiding the reality of encountering trauma in patients in the psychoanalytic and psychotherapeutic situation and in the culture as a whole. For example, just quickly to take the Holocaust instance, we know that there was a great deal of Holocaust testimony in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War, in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Lots of people spoke and wrote about their experiences. The problem was, nobody listened. They were met with this silence. And indeed, in various settings, particularly in Germany, they were met with active denial of the reality of their experiences. And it's as a consequence of that denial, that silencing, that they became silent until at least the 1960s.